recording the presentation with Steve's permission, so that will be available for the public to see after the event. So if you're not meant to be here, hide behind your sofa. If I could also ask people if you can refrain from using the chat box during the actual talk. Every time you send a chat message to everyone, it pops up on the screen and interrupts everybody's viewing, and that's just a little bit of a shame for people. So anyway, welcome to South Wales. Welcome to Steve. Steve has got a fellowship with the Royal Photographic Society, and he also has sat on the Distinctions Fine Art panel, and he produces beautiful work, which I'm looking forward to seeing this afternoon. So I think, Steve, if I can hand over to you, please, sir, and let you take over. Welcome.
No problem. Thank you very much for inviting me to show you my work today. Hopefully everyone can hear me. If not, then please let me know. Okay, so I'm going to start off from the very beginning.
Quiet, Steve.
Sorry?
You are a bit quiet.
I'm a bit quiet, am I?
Yeah, you are a bit quiet, yes.
Okay. I wonder if I can adjust my microphone.
I hope so.
We're coming through loud and clear this end.
Yeah.
Yeah, loud and clear here too.
Fine with us.
Yeah, fine, fine.
All good here?
Yeah.
I wonder if it's actually on the person's computer, if you can turn your volume up there. You seem to be coming over okay, Steve.
Okay, so I can't seem to find, I'm not an expert with Zoom, I must admit, but I can't seem to find an adjustment for the microphone.
Sounds fine, David. I wouldn't worry. It's fine.
Okay. No.
It's probably easier.
You're loud and proud this way as well.
Yeah. I think it's probably easier, as Stewart said, for the person who's having the problem to up the volume on their computer.
Okay, so in theory, you should better see that screen, yeah?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Okay, no problem. So, yeah, I'm going to take you back to the very beginning. The beginning of photography for me was in about 1982 or so. I was going on holiday to Lanzarote, and I didn't have a camera, knew nothing about photography, but I wanted to take a camera with me, so I borrowed one. It was a rangefinder camera, and I knew nothing about how to set the exposure, etc. So, you know, back in those days, the film box would have some sort of details, what to do on a cloudy day, a sunny day. So I just used those to model my way through the exposure. And luckily, the prints, when I got them back from the chemist, the prints were great. They were well exposed. And what really excited me about using the camera while I was on holiday was the composition, what to leave in and what to leave out of the composition. So I decided when I got back that I wanted to go to a night school to learn how to use the camera, and they taught us the basics of apertures and shutter speeds and holding the camera, all the basics, which were fairly sort of basic really. Once you've got those, you know how to use a camera. The difficult bit, as we all know, is where to point it. And now, along with the basic sort of camera instruction, the tutor led us into the darkroom as well. Just a little bit of sort of almost like a novel aspect of the darkroom. This was what I used to do in the darkroom. These were the techniques they taught us. As I say, it was just really a novel sort of darkroom sort of work, you know, sort of. So we would get a piece of plastic in the negative carrier here, and it would sort of like a bit of distorted plastic, maybe a bit of scratched plastic, or even a broken glass. I've even used a tea bag. I would sandwich these in the middle here of the negative carrier, and it would create a a textured surface on the print here, a textured sort of screen, which would turn the print from being a standard sort of record photograph to something, something quite artistic in some cases. And that really appealed to me, and it's something I still do today, but in the digital darkroom. The other thing we used to do as well was adjust the focus. Now, then, for instance, if your print was set to be exposed for, say, 5.6 for 10 seconds or something, after about 7 seconds or so, I would turn the focus knob here to turn it out of focus. Now, you would still get the right exposure because ultimately the exact amount of light is hitting the print. But what it would do would create a sort of a soft focus effect where the colors would start to bleed into each other. So those two sort of aspects really excited me, and I wanted to use those, and I still do use them every single day in every picture I do. So you'll see here, this is a print of it's some Sampson's Harbour in Guernsey, and there's a texture screen added over the top here, quite a heavy sort of texture. And if you had the skills in the darkroom, you could use your hands to sort of mask out various bits and maybe just leave the sky in there or something like that. Obviously today in the digital world, we can do that quite a bit easier. And this would demonstrate the color bleeding here. So where the sort of colors, the edge of the color, the red cardigan here match the sky, and the colors are sort of bleeding all into each other, which gives that lovely soft focus effect, similar to what you would get by adding Vaseline to a filter back in the day, you know. Okay, so what I do now is in the digital darkroom, I use textures, and I use these pretty much in every print. And I'll photograph things like walls and floors and tiles. Literally anything can be used as a texture. The other thing I'll do as well is I'll hand paint some cardboard and use those as textures. You can see at the bottom here, there's a piece of card, which is actually this bit of card here. It's just a sort of 7 or 8 inch square piece of cardboard, which I've painted on the top of it, some sort of emulsion paint, a bit of ground from the garden to create a physical texture. Now, what I'll do with that is I can use that in 2 ways. I can use it as a still life backdrop, so I will sit something on that to use that actually in the photograph, or I'll use it in Photoshop as a new layer, a textured layer in Photoshop to create an effect instead of using an actual photograph. So I'll either photograph it or scan it into Photoshop. These are some of the textures I'll use, photographic textures. Old wood, sort of weather-beaten wood really works very well. All these sort of like cracks around here will add sort of texture to a picture, and they can be quite prominent within the picture just by changing the blending modes. That's a manhole cover, and just these little circular shapes and this white and grey sort of contrasting colours here, well, again, could add a very interesting texture to a picture. Weather damaged wood, peeling paint, all these sort of things here are wonderful textures for pictures. And again, there's some peeling paint. This is my workshop here. There's some paint on there. The sun's been on it and has worn away the paint here. So these sort of marks will create lovely textures within the pictures. So with that sort of knowledge, back in 2003, 4, 5, I started working on a panel of pictures for a RPS fellowship. Now looking back, because I've added this slide into this presentation today for the first time, and I haven't looked at this panel for a number of years, and it looks a little bit dated now, I guess. But back in 2005, it was fairly novel. There was not too many people doing things like this with photography. So that got my fellowship back in 2005 without any sort of problems at all. It just sailed through everything. And that's probably one of the reasons why I have always wanted to do another fellowship panel. The whole process to me is very rewarding. And I always say this when I'm giving a presentation, and even though it's an RPS event, I'll say the same thing. The letters after your name, in my view, don't make you a better photographer, but that journey you take to get those letters certainly will stretch your creativity. So that was the panel of images I did for that one, and we'll just go over 2 or 3 of those now. So this is getting your hands dirty. Now, what I used to do, these were photographed on a film camera. I used a Minolta 9000. I hadn't quite yet moved to a digital camera. but I did use Photoshop. So I scanned the negatives into Photoshop with a Nikon CoolScan. And from there onwards, I would add the textures to the background. So essentially, all of that print, the original work, would have been created in camera. Just a tabletop set up there. I had the bottles. That's a bottle of Remy Martin brandy, I think. And I got I got a little sort of craft drill, and I cut around the bottle here, snapped the top off, and then I painted the bottles with bits of different colored paints. And then while the paint was still wet, I would scratch some of it off to create these sort of scratch and streaky marks in it there. There's a bit of sand in the bottle to hold the flower in the top of it. And then the textures have been added in Photoshop. But ultimately, the majority of that work was literally in my workshop, making the bottle, painting it, getting the setup sorted out. The composition for me is vital to all the pictures, and I pay a lot of attention to composition. Again, what I did here was paint the bottle, and I made sure that I painted the inside of the bottle the same sort of shade as the flowers were going to be. So the whole composition has had a terrific amount of thought put into it. This is a bottle of Head and Shoulders shampoo, which I no longer have to use, actually. And we put these flowers on the top of it, lots of sort of muted colors around. So those are just 3 of the images from the fellowship panel back in 2005. Now, I tend to concentrate on 3 subject matters: characters, putting characters into different pictures. Still life is my passion. That's where it all began for me, and that's where I feel most comfortable, to be honest. So I always go back to still life no matter what. And nautical pictures, obviously, Guernsey, a tiny little island, we're surrounded by sea, lots of harbours, yachting events, and loads of things to photograph around the sea. So we're going to concentrate on the character pictures next. And what I'll do for these is I need 3 or 4 different images to actually create a background. The first part of the process for me is creating the background. So I'll drive around Guernsey, walk around, take some pictures of different things I could use for different landscape pictures, really, that I can then fit a person in. So here I would have focused on this foreground. That would have been the interesting bit for me, this foreground, and maybe these lovely sort of autumn coloured leaves in the trees as well. That's Castle Corner in Guernsey here. This sort of paving work with the little bits of grass poking through the joins. That could have been used as a foreground picture as well. And again, I tend to like pathways, and gravestones are always quite interesting for textures. But I like this pathway in the centre of the picture. So I would have taken that with a view to putting someone in that pathway. But ultimately, the foreground would have been used for different pictures. And then I need some middle distance information. And that could be just some trees, a wall, some old cottages, a barn, a farmhouse, anything that will add middle distance information to give it some sort of information, some sort of detail in the middle of the picture. Again, here we've got some Guernsey cows and these trees here, a cottage or 2, something like that. And then a sky. Now the sky is going to have loads of textures added to it. So it's not going to resemble that sky at all, but in order for me to move forward, I still need to put a sky into the picture so I can actually move forward with the process. And then I have the textures, whether they're photographic textures or hand-painted textures. These 4 here are all hand-painted textures. And I'll add them into Photoshop, and then I'll change the blending mode. And then I might decide if I see one that I like, and it just affects a tiny bit of the picture, then I'll use a layer mask just to reveal the bits I want to see and hide the bits I don't want to see. So the process of getting to the finished background can take a long, long time, because I might just work on a texture that affects a tiny bit of the frame. And then it gradually builds up until you've got your finished background. And then what I need to do now is find a subject to put into the background. So I go to a place called the West Show. It's in Guernsey. It's an event that's held every August. This year it wasn't held for obvious reasons. And it's a sort of a celebration of Guernsey in the Victorian days. People get dressed up. There's a parade, and it's a very sort of low-key event. You can get right up to the action and photograph these characters. I stand at a distance just photographing them as they're on this parade, because I don't really want any communication with them. I just want them as objects that are going to be in the picture. So I would have focused in on these two characters here, and I use the quick selection tool within Photoshop, which really gives a very, very good quick selection. And then I tied it up with the lasso tool. Generally speaking, I'll give an accurate selection around the couple here, and I'll also import the grass area underneath them as well into the new picture, and it helps to sort of ground the characters in there. So once I've done that, I take them into the new picture, and there it is. That's the finished picture. Excuse me, just a moment. So one of the questions which I'm always asking myself is whether to add the textures over the subject. And I kind of like to do it. In this particular case here, I haven't. So we've got a texturized background, and we've got the two subjects here, which are very, very sharp. It's very sharp cutout. But in my view, it looks a little bit false. I quite like to overlay the textures over the couple as well. So once I've got to this stage, I then add textures over them, so they become part of the picture. This is just a screen grab from the West Show. As I said, it's held every August. Every sort of significant year where there's like, if for instance, it's a liberation anniversary or something like that, a special year, they'll put on a parade, but the parade isn't every year. And I'm talking to you from about up here somewhere. This is the west coast of Guernsey here. So these are some of the pictures I would have taken on the day. As I said, I'm just standing at a distance, photographing the characters as they go about. I'm sort of looking for pictures I can maybe use to create an image later on. I particularly like people that are looking away from the camera for some reason. I've used those quite a lot because I don't really want them to be the main subject as such. I want them to be almost small enough and insignificant enough to be part of the overall picture, but not the main subject as such. This girl here, I remember taking this one, and I remember thinking at the time, the dark skin, the white clothing, the lovely costumes here, I knew that was going to be quite a good picture. I knew I could do something with that girl in one of the frames later on. And again, this old chap just about to get onto his push bike, looking away from the camera. So I knew that was one I was going to use as well. So these are some of the pictures I did with a view to doing a fellowship panel in 2015-16. As I said earlier, the first panel of images in 2005 was held straight through, and I've always wanted to do another one. So I did another panel in 2016, I think it was, and these are some of the pictures for this year. So I'm using the gradient tool along with a layer mask to merge the two, the foregrounds and the backgrounds, and then I'm adding this sort of just a hint of some information in the middle distance of the pictures here. Okay, so that's a field of cabbages, or is it cauliflowers? I think they're cabbages, and that's pretty much all it is, isn't it? So I've used this as a texture or an overlay to create a field of flowers and a feeling of summer, basically. So that particular texture, photographic texture, has been used in this next picture here, along with that, which is the front door of my house here. And you can see the frosted glass, and behind there, there's some greenery from a tree. So I've used those two textures in this next picture here. Now you can see the cabbages here by using textures over the top of the cabbages. I've taken away a lot of the clarity, a lot of the definition, and they've just been rendered as white areas of floral interest, really. And then the actual greenery from the front door has been added here to create the illusion or the impression that there's a mountain in the background. This is probably one of my favorite pictures from that fellowship panel. And I've added this area of sort of foliage just to frame the two people in the picture there. Breaking the rules of composition, I absolutely adore this. I love to do this as much as I can. As you go along through this presentation, you'll realize that I don't do things the way you're supposed to do. I try and do things a little bit different. And breaking the rules is something I will try and do every time if I can. So I put the tree in the center of the frame here. and the girl walking out of the picture. And again, that's probably one of my favourite from the fellowship panel. It looks absolutely wonderful. I think it looks wonderful on printed paper. And I'm very fortunate to be sponsored by Photospeed, and I use the matte papers. I tend to use, my preferred paper would be the natural soft texture or platinum etching, any of those matte papers. I very rarely use a gloss or a brighter paper. Okay, so what I've done with this chap here, this is one of the pictures I showed you a few minutes ago. And I've tried to use the autumn leaves in the foreground of the picture here to almost frame him. So he's in the center of the frame, and these leaves are sort of framing him, almost like vignetting him into the center of the frame there. And this is a sort of a tree I photographed in another area. So there's 3 or 4 different elements here, all coming together to create that picture. And lots of textures within the sky area here. So it's not like a bland grey sky, it's got some texture to it. And again, on print, and I do stress print because in my view, a print or a photograph, an image isn't finished until it's a print. If I'm doing a presentation in person, it will always be a print presentation for me. Okay, so again, I've used this this leaf to create a mountain in the next picture you'll see, and that's nothing more than just a leaf which is being used as a texture, and that appears here in the background of this picture here by changing the blending modes, reducing the opacity, and maybe adding a slight texture over the top of it of some concrete or anything like that, just to lessen the obvious effect that it's a leaf. And it just gives you the impression, or at least I'm hoping it's giving you the impression, that there is a mountain in the background. And again, as it says there, as much texture and grunge as I can get away with. If you were to show these to a lot of people, I'm sure they would, that knew nothing about photography, I'm sure they would probably think it's a painting rather than a photograph. Okay, so what I've done with this one is I've used the daffodils to create a sort of a yellow sunshine effect within some of the pictures. So by using Gaussian blur and more textures over the top of the daffodils, they're then rendered just a yellow hue, really. Just this area here is all yellowness, which is just trying to give you the impression that it's a lovely warm summer's day. And as it says there, creating atmosphere, that's my ultimate goal really when I'm creating a picture. These impressionistic pictures are to create atmosphere like a nice warm summer's day. The sky area, this mottled effect here, is probably a concrete texture, or maybe even some lichen from a gravestone, which tends to work very well. And just by adjusting the blending modes, you can create all sorts of different effects here. And if it's too overpowering, you can use you reduce the opacity, or maybe a layer mask just to reveal some of it. This is again one of my favorite pictures from the fellowship panel. And what I did here was to add loads and loads of textures over the 2 girls here, so they almost become part of the background. And there's not really any sort of identification. There's no sharpness around their figures here. It's all merging into the background, so it becomes part of it as well. Same sort of thing here. I've added loads of textures to remove the sharpness. I'm trying to get rid of all that photographic quality. We all go and buy the best cameras we can, the wonderful lenses, and we take really pin sharp pictures. And you've probably got to go out of your way to get some sort of effect that isn't an actual sharp picture, you know. So unless it's in camera movement or something. So I use textures to get rid of that photographic sharpness to create something with atmosphere and mood. This is a sort of a castle I photographed in Scotland, and I've used it in a few pictures which you'll see today. Lots and lots of grunge around this middle distance here to create some sort of information in the middle part of the picture. And then what I try and do as well, the first thing I do when I'm creating a picture is I get the subject, I decide which subject I want to put, and I decide how big they're going to be in the frame. If they're too big, they can become the main subject. If they're very small here, then I feel, as they are in this one, that they sort of become part of the overall picture. And it's almost like a landscape then. And of course, where to put them. Now with my idea of breaking the compositional rules, if I can get away with putting them in the center of the frame, that's what I'll do. If I have to put them over to the left-hand side facing outwards, walking out of the picture, again, I'll do that if I can do that. So that was the finished fellowship panel. Now then, as was explained before, for about 9, maybe 10 years even, I've sat on the RPS visual art or fine arts, whatever it happened to be called. I've been through several different stages. I think at one time it was even called creative. Ultimately now it's visual art, I think, which probably suits best. Now then, I'd sat on there for about, or must be 8, 9 years or so. And I made a mistake. I stupidly thought I can do this without any help whatsoever. So I didn't show this work to anybody. I arranged with Andy at the RPS that I would become Phil Allen for a couple of years while I entered this panel, so nobody would know it was me. And obviously I arranged that I wouldn't be sat on any of the panels when it came to be assessed. Now there was 4 or maybe 5 pictures that the assessors picked up on which weren't quite up to standard. And I think, you know, sometimes your work can be so passionate, you can be so passionate about it, you can't actually see where there's a problem, where there's a mistake, where something can be improved. So I have to admit, when I first got the letter back, I thought, what's going on here? You know? But then they were exactly right. And there was 3 or 4 different things which I should have put right. And once I corrected those, this is the finished panel here, and it was so much stronger, you know, so it just sort of proves I should have had some help and some advice with this, because I was too close to it to actually see the errors. What I've done here is I've used the warp tool and some grunge within the sky areas here. So I've used the warp tool to give the horizon line here a little bit of curvature to make more of an interesting picture, and it's not just straight across the middle. And again, lots and lots of grunge around this chap here. So his clothing and his hat and everything is bleeding into the background. Okay, so this is sort of my ideal composition. Tree in the center here. I've done this a few times now. We've got some symmetry. I've added this leaf texture here just to give a slight hint that there's a mountain or a tree or something in the background here. And there's 2 of those on either side creating this symmetry. Lots of yellow daffodil textures here to give you the impression that it's a nice warm summer's day. And we've got these 2 ladies here with the umbrella, this lovely Victorian clothing, again walking out of the frame with a little dog there with them as well. So these are the sort of things I love messing around with. So I think we've discussed some of this already, but these are the things I'm trying to do when I'm creating a picture, to blur the edges of photography, you know, break the rules, put in all these textures. Is it photography? Well, I don't really know. It's probably photographic art, isn't it? It certainly all starts off as a straight photograph. To remove the clinical sharpness that we automatically and easily get with a camera. All cameras now are so good, you've really got to try hard to get a badly exposed or blurry shot, haven't you? You know, just pressing the button, you create these wonderful sharp images. Distress the image in the same way as you'll get distressed furniture. You know, I'm creating distress to the image. To create mood and atmosphere, all these pictures, these character studies I've been doing are to create mood, atmosphere, and impressionism. And if I can produce a picture worthy of hanging on the wall, then that's great, I love that. Okay, so I use hue and saturation very often to mute the colors. Because I use the matte papers, I find that very subtle sort of colors and hues do print very well indeed. So this used to be a chapel, it's just down the road from me. It's now been converted into accommodation. And this floral area here is a sort of like an inlet, an island I photographed in the Lake District. And I put the 2 things together with the birds here and added the smoke in the chimney. Smoke is very, very easy to add. It's just literally smoke, which I photographed against a dark background. And by changing the blending modes, you just reveal the white smoke. So that's very easy to do. And these, again, are some of the things I love messing about with in photography, trying to create something a bit different. Horse racing, we have a horse racing event, just one of them every year, every May, first bank holiday in May. Again, that didn't happen this year for obvious reasons. And you can get very close to the action here. So I'm standing against the fences, photographing the jockeys and the riders as they go through. But obviously I wanted to get rid of the distractions in the background. We've got these people and the fence, and I wanted to create something a lot more sort of impressionistic. So this was my take on what I did there. I've just added the jockeys along with the grass they were running into the new picture. So I've kept elements of the ground, which is they're kicking up with their hooves, and I've tried to put some atmosphere within the frame too. And that's sort of like the finished print as such. Okay, so this is the hull of a boat I photographed in Exeter a few years ago. And as it says there, this reminds me of the sea, the sand, white areas here, which are some waves, some yellow hues down here, which are a little bit of sand, and some more sea area at the bottom. So that's being used as a texture in a number of pictures, which you'll see today. This one here, this is some beach shots I photographed a few years ago, and I've had that texture I've just shown you in this area here behind the beach shots and just around the edge here, and that's to give you the impression that there's a bit of water there, and there's some, that doesn't look good, and there's a bit of water there within the background, and some sand as well. I've added, I've used the transform tool to sort of slightly change the shape of the beach shots, and that's quite a picture that looks really nice in print. Okay, again with breaking the rules here, composition, I've said a few times, is really vital to me. It's the aspect that got me interested in photography in the first place. So I've put this chap walking out of the frame here on the left. There's just a tiny bit of information here in the middle distance of this picture. And again, a sort of like a leaf that has been used there to create the illusion, the impression there's a mountain or a hillside in the background. Okay, so the white layer, I'm sure lots of you know about the white layer. It's used by many people. There's a tutorial available on my website if you want to have a look at it. But ultimately, it's very, very simple. It's probably a bit too complex to mention right now, but it is a very simple procedure. And here you probably won't really see the advantage of using it, but this is the one without it, and this is the one with the white layer. All it does really is sort of slightly, very, very slightly soften the effect. Almost bleeds the colors a little bit, but it's very, very subtle. And I tend to add this. The first thing I'll do when I'm working on a picture is I'll add this, and then I'll add it 3 or 4 more times as the picture evolves. If you do it too much to start with, it can maybe be a bit too over the top. You know, I like to gradually do it and slowly work it through. Okay, so creating the effect of a cityscape background. So as I've traveled around the place, you photograph different things. This was photographed in Austria, but I've got different pictures like this from all over the place. And I use these buildings to create the impression of a cityscape, really, some skyscrapers and just a bit of city information within the picture. So I've used that one to create this one here. Now this is, this girl here is actually a splodge of paint. From my workshop. My daytime job is an engraver. I'm a glass engraver, and I've got a workshop just at the top of my house here. And this is just a bit of wood which has got some paint on it. And I was looking at it one day and I thought that looks a little bit like a girl with a rucksack. Got a head here, there's the torso, some legs, and she looks like she's carrying a rucksack. So I thought I'm going to use that in one of the pictures, and I've used the some different buildings from various cities here in the middle distance to create that impression that there is a city in the background there. And I can see this girl is walking into the city, maybe a little apprehensive, doesn't know what she's going to find. It's getting dark, she's maybe a little bit scared, and that's the sort of impression I was trying to put across here. And this particular one was the first image that's led me on to do several others, which you'll see in the second half later on. Now this is a cart track. I go for a walk every day to try and keep fit, and on my walk I see this, I go past this field every day. It's just literally a cart track. And I thought, I wonder if I could put someone in the middle of that cart track. So what I've done is I've used this particular frame, and then I've found a person I can put in the cart track, and I've tried to, using textures, I've changed it from being a pretty boring grey day into a summer's day. So this is the end result of that one. And this girl, taken from the the West Show event I go to, I like the way she's holding her hat, and there's not really any identification to her. And then I've added all these textures around the sky and around these grass and floral areas here. And again, she's dead center of the frame. Okay, so sometimes I create a background and then I have to find the subject to fit into it. So I've made this background up with various different elements. You can see some sort of yellow colors in here. We've got the hay underneath here. Two or three different pictures all put together. And I found this old tractor subject, which I can put into the frame as well. Same sort of thing here. We've got the daffodil texture, which is being used to create this lovely yellowness here of a nice warm summer's day. That castle I've mentioned before from, I photographed in Scotland somewhere, I can't remember where it was. And I've used the Glamour Glow filter. I very rarely use any filters, especially within Photoshop, but there's one called Glamour Glow, which is in the Nik effects filters or software package. And that's a really nice filter for making the whites very bright and brilliant. So I've used it over the back of this wheelbarrow here to really draw your eye into it. And it really does bring out the lightness and the brightness of that, of whatever you're using the filter on. Now, if you use the white layer filter or white layer effect too many times, you can get this sort of, I say too many times, it can work to your advantage just by creating this lovely sort of burnt out colors and where the colors all bleed into one another. So you're almost getting like a very, very over the top soft focus effect. And I've added a bit of smoke to this house as well. Same sort of thing here, keeping the colors very, very subtle. And this is ideal for printing on a matte paper. It really does come out lovely. There's no sort of burnt out highlights. And by keeping the man on his bike here very, very small in the frame, he's just become part of the picture, part of the landscape, and not necessarily the main subject. Okay, what I've done here, and I've used this technique a few times now, is to use the warp tool on a house or a building or something to give it a little bit of curvature on the walls and the roof of this house. So it almost looks like it's been painted by hand. This is the same picture I used with the girl walking into it a few minutes ago. You saw that one, but I've slightly changed it. I've added this cottage here and these geese, I think they're geese in the front of the picture. So composition, I've said, is all important to me. I photographed this chap on a holiday in Tenerife, and I've just reduced the evidence of photography by using lots of textures over the top. And again, I've enhanced the water that was there already with that texture I've used of the beach scene before to create this lovely sort of muted colors here. And this chap walking out of the frame. These are the things I like to do. Keep the composition very uncomplicated, very, very simple. A photographic style. Now, this is something we all create. I think I've definitely created a photographic style of my own. It's very difficult for me to put pictures anywhere without somebody realizing who they are. And I think we can all say the same thing. You know, we can all go to our club, put pictures on the wall, and we probably know whose they are, because subconsciously or consciously, you actually create a style all of your own. So I've definitely picked up on this style here, and it's something that I really do enjoy doing, and I want to continue with it. End of part one.
So Steve, did you want a few minutes break, or did you want to go straight into part two?
It's entirely up to you. I thought there was a bit of a break, but we don't have to.
I think it might be worth carrying on if everybody's okay with that, because I know there are meetings later on that some people might want to go to. Is that okay if we crack on, if you're all right with that, Steve?
Yeah, no problem at all.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that should be back with you now.
It is, Steve, yeah? Perfect.
Great stuff. Okay, so still life. As I've said, still life is my real passion. I feel most at home with still life. And I like actually getting into the workshop. I mentioned before some of the things I do. This is a bottle here, which has been painted by hand. It's like a water can. And I use that in my original fellowship panel with a flower poking out the top of it. Other things I like to do are to paint boxes, which I can use to house something within the box there. And of course, these textures we've mentioned as well. So these are the things I love to do. So a Saturday for me typically is photography day. I try to avoid anything else, just photography. I'll either take pictures in the morning, work on them in the afternoon. And by the end of the day, if I've created a picture, then that's good. Okay, so the techniques for still life are pretty much the same as what I've mentioned before for the character studies. Same sort of idea. It starts off with a blank canvas, and then I add the textures to it to create the background. And that's the finished background. So originally, all of the still life pictures are captured with a wallpaper background. So you just get a roll of wallpaper from B&Q. The back of that wallpaper tends to be a lovely sort of yellowy hue, not pure white, but more of a yellowy creamy color. And I use that for my background. So I'll typically create like an L-shaped background, or I'll put a bit of wallpaper on the floor. I'll put the main subject on top of the wallpaper, and then I will photograph it. And then I create this background from textures I've made. So once I've got to this stage, I then need to find a subject to put into it. And there's some flowers there. You'll know that I don't know all the names of these flowers. I know hardly any of them actually, but these things here are really sort of drew my eye, the wonderful colors. So I would either import them into the new picture by changing the blending mode, and sometimes that will allow me to just import the flower and lose the background. Because the background is a light color, very often that will work. If that doesn't work, it's pretty easy to select around these because there's such a contrast between the flower and the background. So with that in mind, I'll move those flowers into the background, and then I'll add some textures over the top of the flowers. So the background was made, I put the flowers on there, and I have some more textures over the top. So the flowers almost become part of the background. So I try and frame the subject with grunge, basically, or something, almost with the idea of using a vignette filter or something around it, so your eye is drawn to the main subject. What I've done here is I've used a texture of a gravestone, the sort of concrete or marble of the gravestone, with an appropriate blending mode. I don't know which one, but there's only about 10 or 11 of them. I just cycle through them until I find something that's interesting. And in this case, it's sort of revealed all this whiteness around here. So I've used that with a layer mask to hide the center bit. So the flowers are framed within this texture. Again, what I'll try and do is use colors of the flowers themselves or the main subject around the outside of the picture here. So there's a repetition of colors. I find that really does help to finish the picture off and make everything look as though it's meant to be, and not just there by accident, but intentionally there, you know. So the colors are repeated. You can see these blues here, replicating the blues and the yellows of these flowers within that. So the composition part of it is extremely sort of considered, you know, not just sort of happened upon, but very considered. Again, breaking the rules here with 2 flowers instead of 1 or 3. What I try and do is use textures to bleed the colors. So if I could actually enlarge this now, I would enlarge this area here to show you that there is no definition between the edge of the flower and the background. And that's been created by adding textures over the top of the flowers, so they become part of the whole print. Okay, so what I try and do here is add a texture to the stem of the flower to give it almost like a hand-painted effect. So there's various textures I can use for that. And very often it's concrete or a damp wall or something like that. And you overlay that over here and just use a layer mask to reveal the bits around the stem of the flower. And that will give you the idea, the jagged edges here, that the stems are being hand-painted, you know. What I do is I go to car boot sales and charity shops, and I buy bits of junk for a couple of pounds or so that I can then use as a subject for the still life pictures. So I've got a bowl here. It's like an enamel bowl with some black outline here. And when I imported the daffodils into the picture, because they would have been photographed on the wallpaper as all the other things have been done, and I imported them into the new frame. And then by using the blending modes, I came across one that just sort of hid all the details of the daffodil, but you can quite clearly see what it is. But it took all the information, all the detail away from it. So I quite like that. So I use that on this particular frame. Excuse me. So the textures I use, like again, this one here, which I'll show you again here, I also use these as a background for the picture as well. So in this particular case, I've used one of my hand-painted textures as the backdrop for this hydrangea. And then I've added the textures around the outside of it, this sort of interesting colours. That's designed really to replicate the colours of the flower. All of these colours here will sort of link into the flower, so it's all part of one piece. Using the same sort of techniques, what I try and do as well is to replicate the delicacy of these dandelion heads here. The wonderful sort of, they're so delicate, you've only got to move them and they break to bits, don't they? So photogenic. So I've tried to replicate here by using the texture from the gravestone around the outside here. It's sort of almost repeated the delicacy of these, the sort of area at the top of these dandelion heads. So that's repeated around the picture as well. I love using different things to create an effect on the picture. Now what I've done here, I've used a backdrop of some inkjet paper. Another paper I quite like is Hahn and Müller. They do a lovely one which is called Torsion, and it's a lovely sort of bumpy hammered finish. And I've used that as the background for this flower here. And again, I've tried to replicate the colours of the flower within here as well. And again, using sort of like almost like a vignetting effect to actually frame the flower within that effect as well. Okay, so the composition for this would have been very well considered within the camera. I try and do as much as I possibly can composition-wise in camera. So these three daisies, I think they're daisies, they were very large daisies actually. And I set up the sort of almost like a triangular shape here for the composition. Very, very carefully and well considered. You know, there's been a lot of time spent on that. And then I've imported it into this new backdrop, which I've created within different textures. Okay, so this is my very sophisticated darkroom, or sorry, still a studio setup, which is on the left of me here, my conservatory. I use that because the roof is frosted and it softens the colours down, all the sort of wonderful soft light it gives. So, and you can quite clearly see there's a tea towel here, there's my tripod, there's the wooden floor. So there's nothing there that is very sophisticated. I use no lighting system or anything like that. I control the light with bits of card, some black card or white card to bounce the light or maybe give it a bit of a shadow area. So what I've done with these apricots, I've added some textures to create this picture here, which is one I like very much indeed, actually. And again, printed on the right paper, it looks really good. I've used Gaussian blur to lose the sort of join between the plate or the bowl and the background. And again, lots and lots of textures within the apricots. So they're all becoming, merging in together to create a painting-like effect. Okay, so I need a base. When I create a picture, one of these still life setups, I need some sort of base for the flowers or whatever it happens to be to sit on. So the bottom part of the picture is always very, a bit darker than the rest of it. And there's always some sort of base for the flowers to sit on. So this area of greenery here has been there intentionally placed there so that some sort of flower or object could actually sit on the base here. So that was my fellowship panel I did with the Irish Photographic Federation about 2016, same time as the RPS one went through as well. And that one was a still life panel, as you can see, and I really enjoyed creating that. It was a wonderful project to work on. And if I could actually think of another subject, I would willingly do another panel. Producing these panels of work is something I really do enjoy. Okay, along with photography, one of my other passions is cooking. And I like nothing better than getting in the kitchen and creating some sort of dish with a glass or two, or maybe a bit more of some wine, and create a lovely dish. In this particular case, I've been to the fishmonger and I saw this lovely mackerel, smoked mackerel. And I thought there's two things I can do here. I can eat it and I can photograph it. So firstly, I photographed it, and there is the original picture. and I ate it after that, and it was delicious, I have to say. So I've used that particular smoked mackerel to create this picture here, which again is one I really do like. There's one of my square texture frames around that there. You can just see that. I've copied and pasted the mackerel, and I've given it a slightly different facial feature, so it's not obviously the same one. And what I've tried to do here is to make the most of these lovely yellow goldy colours of the mackerel. So by increasing the hue and saturation, I've really made them sort of pop out. That's what I've tried to do, make it sort of pop out to you. Okay, so some gravestone textures have been used on this one here around the outside of this frame. One of the plates I bought at a charity or car boot sale or something. And the wording from the gravestone has been reversed. You can't easily see what it says. And there's nothing really there making sense to obscure the view as such, nothing to draw your eye to it other than some grunge within the background. I would very rarely use wording within the background of a picture, but I think it does work in this case. And it's something I might explore doing again in the future. So I've used a layer mask to hide the bulk of the lettering detail from the center of this picture. No manipulation allowed. This is something I try and do sometimes. I've worked on a couple of different projects like this, where it's just a still life picture and no manipulation, no work in Photoshop at all, other than creating the square format. So this is a refuse bag. I was doing the rubbish one day and I was quite impressed by the way you could still see what's in the bag, and the way the creases and the folds distorted what was in the rubbish. So I thought I can maybe create a still life picture with that. So I got this refuse bag, put some apples in there, and I quite like that effect. And I really enjoyed doing that. Okay, so hand-painted paper. So this is the sort of paper you would buy in a shop, like Paper Chase, handmade paper. I've actually in the past made my own paper as well by getting the different bits and pieces you need to create your own paper. So I've used that as a background for this picture here. And by reducing the saturation, it's just become part of the background image, and it helps to sort of frame these in the middle here. Incidentally, if you get a light behind these, I can't think what they're called for a second, but if you get a light behind it, they really do show up very, very well indeed. Okay, so Nautical, we're going to move on to this now. This is the seascape background I've used before, we mentioned, and that's been used in several pictures here by means of creating a bit of sky, a bit of sand, a bit of sea, and to give you the illusion, the impression that it's a picture of the sea, basically. So we add some sky to it and some boats. This is St. Peter Port Harbour, always some sort of old fishing boats here. Or else there's some yachting events. This was taken in the Lake District, this one. And in this next picture here, you're going to see this particular boat here, this dinghy, I think it is, with this lovely, wonderful reflection in the water. So I've used that whole part of this frame within the next one here. Which really to me looks a bit like a watercolour. And if that's printed on paper and you show someone, they'll probably would think it's a watercolour. In fact, that's happened to me on numerous occasions. I've shown these pictures to someone and they assume it's a painting rather than a photograph. But I'm quite happy with that. I see no problem with that at all. Loads and loads of textures, adding these lovely subtle colours to the sky and the sea here. And you can just see the reflection of this mast within the water. I've also used the transform tool to create the mast, make it much bigger than it should really be. I think you can get away with things like that in this type of photography. Okay, so again, this is my texture here, and you've seen it a few times, so you'll probably remember, you can quite clearly see that's the texture there, just giving you the impression of some sea, some water there, and there's the sort of join line here between the two pictures. Okay, I've used the same texture here to create this illusion of a mountain or a hillside within the picture. Again, I've used the transform tool to elongate the mast, make it much bigger than it should be, and putting the boat dead center of the frame again. Love doing that. What I did here was I used some cracked woodwork along this area here. You can probably see it. So after I've added the texture of the water, I've added a new one in there of some wood. which had some cracks in it, and that to me gave it the impression that it was like oil painting. You know how you get these sort of like scratch marks or very heavy marks of water, of oil painting. That's what the sea looks like to me, with the added texture of the wood over the top of it. Sometimes I'll use copy and paste to paste different areas of the water. So when this picture is almost finished, for instance, I will copy and paste bits of the sea here over this area in the middle of the picture, and again some of this area into the sky. So the colours are repeated throughout the picture and everything tends to merge together. And I don't really want any hard lines between the sea, the sort of like sea very close to you, this middle distance, and the background. I want all those colours to merge together. Okay, so by limiting the colours, this will print very nicely. I know that. This was one I photographed a few years ago of this is the hull of a boat again, and I've used different textures to soften the colours here. Every time you add a texture to a picture, it takes away some of the photographic quality, some of the sharpness, which may not be what you want, but it is what I want. So every time I add a texture, some of that photographic quality is gone. And after doing this many, many times, you then almost become almost left with like a watercolor background. And I've added this boat, the buoy, and the reflection from another picture. Rejects. Okay, so for everyone I've shown you so far, which I like and I'm proud of, and I'm very pleased with, there's about 100 million rejects. So using the techniques I've mentioned before, I thought it'd be quite nice if I was to add some sort of facial features. Initially, I'd sort of like I'd use the clone tool to clone out their facial features, and then I would add some grunge that would just resemble facial features within the character here, and they look almost sinister, don't they? Wouldn't trust them at all. But it didn't work. It just didn't work at all. And that maybe took me 3 or 4 hours to get to that stage. So that's one of my Saturdays that didn't really work very well. I thought it'd be quite nice if I was to get some splodge marks I've mentioned before and create a humanoid sort of figure. So again, I got some sort of paint marks and I've tried to create a human figure, almost like an alien figure, I guess. And again, that didn't really work at all. Okay, so I've got this doll here. She's in different bits. They've got the head, the torso, the legs, all separate. And it's a very old doll, and you can see all this crazing around the head here. So it's an item I want to use in a still life, but I haven't managed to yet. And this is a glass vase I bought. And behind the doll's head is a pump from a fishing tank to create these bubbles around the outside. So again, that's a concept that just didn't work. Fish, that didn't work either. Nudes. Okay, so maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I got together with some friends of mine and we hired out a stately home in Somerset, and we got 2 or 3 models. And this is the type of picture the guys I was with are using for their exhibition work, probably converting it to black and white. And other than adjusting the tonal range, there's probably very little manipulation done to it. But for me, it didn't really work. I've got probably about 1,000 pictures of the models taken on the day. And it didn't really work for me because there was, you know, what I need to do is to take the models out of the picture and put them into a new background. So it would have been better if it was in a studio environment. Here we've got this post which is obscuring her leg and these flowers around her neck. So that just didn't work. And many of the pictures have areas like that. So I haven't really been able to use these at all. I've got 3 or 4 attempts I've made. This is one of the girls I've surrounded with some flowers and some sort of leaves and things. Well, that didn't really work. Again, here I've tried to frame her with different flowers the same way as I would do with a still life project. The last 2 I quite like. I like this here with the way I've sort of framed the body, the torso within this wooden frame. That's getting somewhere where I quite like all these textures around the body here, almost making a painting feel to it. And again, that one there, quite like that too. But I've given up on nudes now. Unless I can have a studio environment, maybe I'll revisit it another day. Okay, I was at RPS in Bath when it was in Bath at the train station, and I'm sure some of you have seen these lovely old scales there. So I thought I've got to photograph that and use it in a picture somewhere. And that's exactly what I did with this one. And this elephant I photographed in Glasgow in a museum. And I thought it'd be quite fun to use the pop-up warp tool in Photoshop and to try and look as though the elephant is balancing on the scale. So I did a lot of work, took ages to do that. And again, it's almost like surrealism, isn't it? But other people are doing this way better than I am. So I've sort of knocked that on the head now. I've got 3 or 4 different mannequins, a couple of ladies and a man, and I thought it would be quite fun to have some fish flying out of her hair. Stupid idea, and where these ideas come from is a little worrying sometimes. But that didn't work either. Okay, so to more recent work. Again, no manipulation allowed. A friend of mine explained to me a while back, a couple of years ago, about what he gets his students to do, photographic students sometimes, and that's to get a piece of material, drop it down on the floor, and however it lands, their task is to create a pleasing composition from that. So it's best if it's like a satin type material, something that will easily fold into nice shapes. So I've tried this, and there's literally no Photoshop work to that. So whereas most of my work is based around manipulation and things like that, it's quite nice. And they really do work very well, very, very simplistic compositions. And I'm using a long lens. I'm using a long lens here, which has allowed the outer parts of it to almost lose their sharpness and become a little bit sort of misty in the background, which does help the whole view, I think. Again, same sort of idea. I've learned it's probably a good idea to merge 2 colors together. This was a project I thought that might work for another fellowship panel, but I think it would kind of be a bit too repetitive, to be honest. Okay, so this is the Rockang Regatta in Guernsey. I photographed this a couple of years ago. It's a nice fun day out. There's usually a couple of thousand people on the beach here, and you can sort of quite easily photograph people just going about the day's fun, really. So I've taken a few pictures, and the next images here, you're going to see these characters here, this woman, this group of kids here, which incidentally had a bit of camera shake on it too, but I've used that to my advantage. So all I'm doing here is I'm going back to what I was doing with the character pictures, but using not necessarily Victorian ones, the Victorian figures. And this girl here, as soon as I saw that girl with that lovely dress on and that hat, I knew I was going to use her in a picture somewhere. I've used these summer flowers I photographed a couple of years ago too, and I've sewn several of these together to create a foreground of flowers for this picture here. And I've used this floral arrangement in different pictures as well. So we've got this girl sort of walking out of the frame, and I'm trying to give you the impression that this is a lovely warm summer's day. So what I'm trying to do here now, these are sort of pictures of the last 12 months, maybe 18 months or so, is to use the blending modes and the techniques I've built on over the last few years, but using blending modes slightly differently, where I'm importing figures and I'm purposely choosing a blending mode that will only import part of the figure. For instance, just the torso, and maybe I'll mix the legs from somebody else, another person. And it's really just to give you the impression there's a figure there. It doesn't have to be in proportion. It doesn't have to be, it could be a man's legs and a lady's body. There's not going to be any detail there that you're going to know that, but it's just importing figures, but without any sharp definition. So the way I want to do things, really, not the way you're supposed to do it. Okay, so beach huts. I really did like this particular frame of the beach huts, but this couple was so annoying in the middle of the frame here, so I had to get rid of them. So I've copied and pasted some of this lovely foliage over the top of them to create this next picture here. With this girl I showed you in the image before, and the texture of the water texture there to give you the impression that there's some water within the background. Same sort of idea here. We've got the water in the background. I'm trying to create the impression of a lovely warm summer's day. Okay, so we've got some odd limbs here, limbs that don't match up with people. This sort of man with a lady's legs here, different figures within the picture. And this is the sort of thing I've been messing around with, you know, really trying to stretch photography to its limits, I guess. And this is something I really do quite enjoy doing. Again, this one here, a perfect summer's day on the beach. These characters within the frame here, texture of the sea in there, and this lovely foliage in the bottom, which is framing this group of kids here. So the composition has been sort of really considered, you know, not just, it doesn't just happen, it's been very well considered. Again, I've used a warp tool here to create this sort of curvature in the roof of this house and almost give like a painterly effect to the whole thing. And this group of kids here, almost like it's a picnic or something like that, you know. Same sort of technique here. I'm trying to get rid of all the photographic detail. So everything becomes part of the whole image and everything seems to sort of blend into one another. Okay, so we saw the one before of the cityscape with the girl going into the background, into the city in the background. What I've done here, I was in Doha in Qatar a few years ago, and this is one of the sort of cityscape pictures I've taken there. Along with this texture I've used of a London cab in London. It was November. All the windows were steamed up and you can see all these lovely lights going on outside here. So I've used these two elements to create this next picture here. In the middle distance, there's the cityscapes, the lights from the texture of the London cab. And this chap sort of walking into the city, you know, it's a really cold day and he's sort of walking, leaving home or something like that. So that was a good experiment to work on. Same sort of idea here, early 20th century, Christmas time, snowing, Victorian couple, trying to create the atmosphere that you would have on a day like that, in a sort of like heavy winter's day. Okay, so I've used the pop-it warp tool. We're almost at the end of the presentation. I've used the pop-it warp tool. This is Christmas Eve. I try and give the pictures a sort of title which is pretty obscure. I go onto a website for naming children's names and things like that, and I find an obscure name, and I've called this one Osmond on Christmas Eve. And I've used the pop-it warp tool to create this sort of character sort of study. So he's awkwardly walking out of the frame and this lovely sort of cityscape within the background there. Same sort of technique here, but this time a slightly different sort of look onto it. Okay, so the sort of things that sort of like give me inspiration to move on with different pictures. I took the dog for a walk last week. When I came back, it was quite a windy day, and this twig was on the doorstep along with loads of leaves, but I quite like the sort of shape of that. I thought I can use that in one of my still life pictures as maybe the stem of a flower or something, you know, because that shape was really quite sexy, I thought. So I'll use that. And this was only Thursday last week, a couple of days ago, I created this picture here, and that's the picture I've done with it. So this is the twig I found on my doorstep, and I photographed that and used it as the stem of these flowers, framed it with this sort of circular vignette around the outside. And that's the sort of typical thing that I absolutely enjoy doing. And that's it. That is the end of the presentation.
Well, Steve, that was excellent. Thank you very much. So many ideas that you've shared for people to respond to. Thank you very much. What I'd like to do, we're going to have, if it's okay with you, Steve, is some questions in a moment from people in the audience, I'm sure. And what I'd like to do is invite Dennis Russ, if you don't mind, Dennis, to give a vote of thanks to Steve and also to ask that first question.
Well, yeah, thanks for chucking me into the deep end.
Yeah, no warning.
First of all, I'll start off with when I'm on Facebook and I post an image, and what I love is when Steve clicks like, and I know I'm doing something A-OK, if that's the phrase. I haven't quite got the brain, if you like, that Stephen has. I'm not an artist, But I tell you what, I've taken lots of notes here today, okay, of what Stephen does. But then I put in big letters, do not copy what he does because it's not right. But I've got to find my own concept. But I would love to say the artist in your head is absolutely tip-top.
Thank you.
And I know there's a lot of artists on here today doing something similar to what you do, and they're all good in their own rights.
Exactly.
So,
Yes.
well, what I would like to say is thank you for coming on today. Okay, I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Good.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Dennis.
Back to you, Stewart.
That's great, Dennis. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
So, has anybody got any questions? If you want to ask them verbally, you're welcome to, or if not, please do put them into the chat line, and I can ask them for you. So, who would like to start?
Can I just ask a quick question?
Of course.
Sorry, Stephen, your first fellowship panel, was it published in the journal by any chance?
I'm sure it must have been. I can't remember, to be honest. It's
Well,
2005.
Yes, indeed, because I remember seeing that, and I did keep a copy of it. In fact, I do have it, and I was totally flabbergasted when I saw that. And as you can see, I did actually got inspiration from you, from your very first fellowship. So thank you very much indeed, and brilliant show today as well. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you. You're very welcome. It's nice. It's nice that you enjoyed it, and it's had some effect on you. That's really nice. Thank you.
If anybody's interested in that, and Jaffa and anybody else, the full archive of the journal is available. You go onto the website, the rps.org, you look for the resources tab at the top, you click on that, and then there's a search. You click on the search for the journal, and if you put Steve Le Provost and fellowship panel, you can cut it down to the year if you like. If it was in the journal, you will be able to see a virtual copy of that. That's a really good question, Jaffa. Thank you.
That's very interesting. I didn't realize that you can do that actually. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Michael Pritchard arranged for the full. It goes right back to the very first journal. They're all on there. It's a super resource.
But I'll tell you what, I've got a copy of this original one, so I'm quite happy with that.
You're okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great question. So, anybody else who?
Yes, Stephen, I'd like to ask a question, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
You talk about putting grunge in the background of your pictures. What exactly do you mean by grunge?
Well, I guess, when you add a texture to a picture and you go through the blending mode, different blending modes, sometimes it will come up as grunge within the picture. When I say grunge, almost like I use it in the skies a lot because I don't want just a plain sky. So it'll create the odd mark or two, which generally speaking, in most photography, you wouldn't want. But in what I'm doing, I do want it. So it creates different marks, almost like the mark you would get of a paintbrush. So brush marks and things like that,
Yeah,
and
great.
it'll create grunge within the background. So give it a mottled effect. So it's not just a plain sky. It's got some sort of effect to it,
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Steve, could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Claire, can you tell me how many layers you end up with on most of your images?
I don't. As I'm working on a picture, if it gets to about 6 or 7 layers, then I decide whether I want to keep it like that. Generally speaking, what I'll do is I'll duplicate the picture, save it as it is, and then work on a copy of that version, and I'll flatten the image down. And I do that because obviously it slows the computer right down if you've got too many layers. Yeah. And then I might have 3 or 4 different versions of a picture going on as I'm working on it. And I can always go back to the last one if it hasn't worked. So I'll only take about 6 or 7, maybe 10 layers, and then I'll flatten it down and move on from that.
I thought there might have been a lot more.
If I added them all in together, there probably would be a good 50 in a picture, but the computer would be standing still.
Crying, yes. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, please?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you have any way of cataloguing your textures? when I'm trying to put a texture over a photo, I have to go through the whole lot to find one that I want. Do you perhaps catalogue them by colour or stone or rust? How do you manage?
I wish I could say I was organised, but I'm not. I work the same as you. I've got 5 folders with maybe 1,000 textures in each one.
Yeah.
And I've got my favourites, you know, as we probably all have.
Yeah.
So I tend to use those most. But if there's one particular one I want, sometimes I have to go through the whole thing for ages to find it. So no, I'm not organised at all.
Oh, okay. I was hoping that you would give me a really easy way of dealing with that, but it's not. No.
I could imagine that doll's house behind you, Christine, could create a fantastic texture.
It does.
Yeah, Chris, yeah, I think you were asking a question, were you?
Yeah, Steve, thank you for a very interesting presentation, very stimulating and very well, wonderful, really. But I noticed that virtually everything you've shown was in square format. So do you have a preference for that, and do you ever work in sort of landscapes or letterbox or anything like that?
No, I tend to work in the square format all the time, and I've done that not subconsciously, not consciously for any reason as such, but I initially found that I could break the rules by putting something centre vertically and horizontally, so I quite like that. And then when I got into the habit of creating a square format and keeping with that, everything looks very neat. And if you're doing a panel of pictures all square, it does look, you know, really nice and neat. And when I did my second fellowship panel, you could then, that was the first time you were allowed to put 21 pictures rather than 20. And I had 3 rows of 7. So, you know, from the pictorial, from the aspect of looking at it, it looked really nice. And just square looks very neat. So that's why I do it, really.
Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, crack on.
Stephen, when you lay your flowers on wallpaper and photograph them, how do you actually hold them in a position that gets them to look as you want? Because flowers have a habit of moving by themselves.
Well, it's done horizontally. So I've got my wallpaper is on the floor, for instance, and the flower is laying on top of it, and I photograph it from above. So it's sometimes I would create like an L shape in the wallpaper, and I would stand the vase up with the flower in the vase. But generally speaking, that's how I did it to start with. Now it's all laying flat. So the wallpaper's flat on the floor, the flower is on top of the wallpaper, and I'm photographing it from above. Sometimes even on a stepladder if I need to get a big distance to it, you know. But very often I will use blue tack to hold things in place, or even a bit of sellotape somewhere here and there, which I'll then copy and paste and get rid of it later, or things like that, you know. So yeah, it's very much a Blue Peter sort of approach. Everything's almost falling down. No sophistication in my studio, no studio lights or anything like that.
Okay, thank you very much.
I got one question, if that's okay.
Sure, Dennis.
Do you ever use a light tab?
A light tab?
Tab, a light box, a light tab, because I just bought an A2 one. So
okay, how do you use that then? What do you use that for?
To put my flowers on top, get all that light that's coming up underneath.
Oh right, okay.
But I don't. If it's at night, I got a very bad habit, as you know. I don't switch my lights off in the room, but I will use a flash gun to bounce the rest of the light around.
I've never tried that. I've got a light box, but it's only A4, I think, and I haven't used it for a long time. But it might be worth doing that. I don't know. I guess I was going to say a flatbed scanner would be the same thing, but it wouldn't, because that light's only on when you're scanning, isn't it? But no, I've got a light box. I might even try that.
Okay, thank you.
Answer the question.
Yeah.
Steve, how do you manage to keep the overall luminosity of your images? They always seem very bright. Where I seem to get the problem, the more layers I add on, the sort of darker or duller the picture gets.
Yeah, so I just use levels to bring it up a bit. What I do find is when I'm adding loads of textures, sometimes you'll get almost like an automatic yellowy sort of hue to the picture. and that what I do for that is I go into Nick effects filters, and there's one there called white neutralizer. I think it's at the very bottom of the stack of those. I think it's called white neutralizer, and it just neutralizes, gives it like a white hue over the picture, so it takes away the color cast, I guess, and that tends to work very well. But yeah, as the picture evolves, like you said, it can get quite dull, depending on what you're doing with the blending modes and textures. So I would go into levels and increase the brightness a little bit as I go throughout the picture.
On the top of the stack or on the individual layers?
At the top of the stack, yes, at the top of the stack. And another thing I do as well is to add a white layer. Do you use white layers? Do you know anything about that?
Use white layers.
So I find that helps to give the picture a bit of brightness, as well as slightly softening the colors and bleeding them. I find it helps to give a bit of brilliance and a bit of brightness to it as well. And then you can do that 2 or 3 times to increase that brightness too, if you want to.
Yeah. On the using the white layers, I mean, Irene Foy does this a lot, as most of us know.
Yeah.
But she will use several white layers on the basis that it improves in stages. But I've never yet to find that it actually does that. Whereas you may as well put one layer on, let's say 100%, and then adjust it for whatever you want to achieve on the overall picture. I mean, do you find it is beneficial for using multiple white layers?
Well, I just put one, and then I just put one on there, and then I will then flatten the image if I like it and move on from there. But I might add it again later on. I mean, I got the white layer idea from Irene as well. I think most people did. But if you speak to her about it, I'm sure she'll say the best thing to do with it is take it and experiment with it. You can make the changes to all of those things and just sort of, you know, make adjustments to suit how you want it to work. So once you've got the basics, you can do all sorts of things with it, really. But I do use
It's all about
pictures.
It's all about experimentation anyway, isn't it?
Of course it is, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, some of my better pictures have been done by complete mistakes.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Right, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Great question, Melvin. Yeah. So any more questions from anybody at all? I think we're about there. Well, Steve, I think we've made a little bit of a record today. I mean, normally there's quite a dropout from between the booked people and the attendees, and 92% of the people who booked to attend have attended, which is an excellent percentage, and 100% of people remained throughout your presentation, even though there was another presentation put on by another group at 4 o'clock. And I'd like to thank everybody in the audience for making 0% interruptions during the presentation, which was fantastic. I really do appreciate that. Thank you. So, Stephen, thank you ever so much for joining South Wales Royal Photographic Society this afternoon, and really just telling us all about your process, which I'm sure will inspire an awful lot of people to revisit their own photography and maybe think about different ways that they can produce it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. And I've had a really nice time. So thank you very much to all of you. It's been really nice sharing my work with you, and hopefully you've had some benefit from it too. So thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
So if we can have a round of applause, please, for Steve. Steve was very happy for us to record, so I will be looking to get that put onto the RPS website, and I'll let you have a link. And I think also there was some really interesting elements of the distinctions, so I'll probably put the link on the distinctions group as well, so you'll better find it there. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, it's dinner time for me, so I'll say bye-bye as well. Take care all.
Fantastic. Thank you.
See you then.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye then. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.